Mr. President, on a completely separate note, I realize that the President made these statements during the course of his campaign, but it still came as something of a shock when the first day of his presidency, Donald Trump decided to issue a blanket pardon for those who had been convicted for the January 6th riot that took place in this building. For those of us who were physically present, it's a moment we'll never forget. The Vice President of the United States was sitting in your chair, presiding over the United States Senate as we addressed the constitutional responsibility of counting the electoral votes. It was roughly 10 minutes after 2 o'clock in the afternoon when someone came along in a suit, walked up to the Vice President of the United States, grabbed him by the arm and pulled him off of the chair. Those of us who were here wondered what was going on. Oh, we could hear the demonstrators outside, but we didn't understand why the Vice President was being removed from this chamber. A member of the Capitol Hill Police then walked up to where you're sitting and announced that this was going to be a safe room. Yes, there were demonstrators outside, even some in the building, but stay here. The Senate chamber will be a safe room. And be prepared for others to come into this safe room to avoid any conflict with the demonstrators. That instruction lasted for about 10 minutes. And then the same officer came up and stood before us and said, change of plans. Everybody evacuate this room as quickly as possible. We all headed out that door, going to another building on Capitol Hill that we thought might be safer away from the demonstrators. Think about that, Mr. President. The capital of the United States of America, taken over by demonstrators. The United States Senate and House of Representatives stopped in progress of doing their constitutional responsibility of counting the electoral votes. And we've seen the videotapes, oh, there are plenty of them, that show these mob demonstrators breaking the windows to get into the Capitol building, knocking down the doors, and then beating up on the police officers. Mr. President, when you and I came to work this morning, there were men and women, some in uniform, others in plain clothes, standing in the corridors of this building. Their responsibility is to keep us safe and to keep those who visit this Capitol safe. They are prepared, many of them, have to be prepared to risk their lives to do it. And to think what they went through on January 6th is outrageous. They were beaten up by these mobsters, these thugs, these demonstrators who were egged on by the President of the United States to come up and go wild in the United States Capitol. Oh, they went wild, spraying bear spray into the face of individual policemen, beating up on them with poles and pieces of furniture. Yes, it was a pretty wild occasion, and it was a criminal occasion, and it led to the most extensive criminal prosecution in the history of our country. Some 1,600 people were prosecuted for their conduct on January the 6th. And I will tell you, as someone who witnessed that and went through that experience, they deserved it. It just strikes me as outrageous. If you heard on the news this afternoon that the Houses of Parliament in London had been invaded by a mob, they had beaten down the doors of the House of Commons and took control of it, you would have said that's impossible. That doesn't happen in a civilized country like England. Well, it certainly shouldn't happen in the United States, and it did, and I witnessed it. And then came the President of the United States in his first day in office, and what did he do? He decided that every single person arrested for a crime related to January 6th should be released with a full and unconditional pardon, and that's what he did. I asked my staff, let's keep track of these people and see what happened to them in the 3 weeks that have passed since the President made that decision. There's some interesting stories, sad stories. Emily Hernandez pleaded guilty to entering and remaining in a restricted building or grounds in relation to her actions on the Capitol on January 6th. Ms. Hernandez was seen holding a stolen, broken nameplate of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She served 30 days in federal prison and was released. Days after being pardoned by President Trump, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for a 2022 deadly drunk driving crash in Missouri, during which she collided with a couple, Victoria and Ryan Wilson, who just left dinner celebrating their 15th wedding anniversary. Victoria died in the crash and Ryan sustained serious injuries. Then there's Daniel Ball, Daniel Ball was arrested for throwing, quote, an explosive device that detonated upon at least 25 officers and forcefully shoving police at the Capitol on January 6th. Daniel Ball was in possession of a gun and ammunition as he came into the Capitol, which was illegal considering his criminal background. The Department of Justice dismissed Ball's charges following President Trump's pardon. I have a long list here, and I'm not going to read them all, but there's one in particular, released with a full pardon by President Trump for the January 6 crimes he committed. Guy Reffitt, the first defendant to stand trial on charges related to January 6 Capitol insurrection, was sentenced to 87 months in prison for bringing a firearm into the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Reffitt's 19-year-old son, Jackson, turned him into law enforcement after the attack. Jackson also indicated that Reffitt had threatened to shoot him and his sister Peyton if they reported him to authorities. After receiving a pardon from President Trump, Guy Reffitt attended Kash Patel's Senate Judiciary Committee nomination hearing. Kash Patel is President Trump's nominee to be the director and head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Reffitt attended that committee nomination, and here's what he posted on social media afterwards. Remember, a man who was released after he was full pardon, after he was convicted of bringing a firearm into the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Certainly not a casual tourist by any means. Here's what he said on the social media, quote, present and in support of Kash Patel as the leftist commies continue to spew lies, misinformation and disinformation. My man, clean house Kash, end of quote. So he certainly seems like he learned his lesson, right? Served time in jail, released with a pardon by the president. He's at it again, defying the authorities, defying anyone who disagrees with him politically. Full unconditional pardon from Donald Trump.